What is up, guys? It is time for an MLB Deeper Dive where we are going to take you through all the things you need to know on today's 12-game MLB slate, one that's looking like it should be a fun one. I am Chris Spags, joined once again by the top player in DFS, the namesake of this YouTube channel, as well as everything we have at Awesemo.com. You know him as Awesemo. We call him Alex Baker. How you doing, Alex?
What's up, guys? Got a nice little slate tonight. Last night was a little bit crazy with the 5-gamer, so looking forward to a big slate today.
You're going to have a lot of options to talk through. So we have another man here who's responsible for all of our customer success at Awesemo behind the scenes and on front of the camera as well. Is going to give you some of the best MLB advice you will find anywhere on the internet. He's Terry McBride. How are you doing, Terry?
Doing pretty good, bud. It's been a wacky little day. Had to do my baseball model update twice this morning, and it took a long time to get through my column because I got way overboard looking into John Means and some of these other pitchers we got to talk about today. So I agree. I think this should be a fun slate to go through.
Yeah, definitely a tough one that we got through yesterday, and we got Caleb in the chat saying he did well stacking the Orioles with some great contrarian advice. We appreciate that and hope you guys are doing well with all your results out there. So make sure you guys are hitting that like button and, of course, subscribing to the channel. We wouldn't be able to do a show like this one every single day if it weren't courtesy of our sponsors. And today, that is No House Advantage, who's taking a different spin on daily fantasy sports by offering player prop contests across the NBA, MLB, NFL, and PGA for cash prizes. And it's an exclusively peer-to-peer fantasy sports platform that levels the playing field. It makes it easier for you to win real cash compared to your traditional DFS sites out there. They have over 500 player props offerings, and No House Advantage is actually the largest provider of player props in the industry. And the best part is that new users over there will get a $20 match deposit bonus today by using the promo code Awesemo. So go download No House Advantage in the App Store or go to nohouseadvantage.com, but beat your friends, not the house, and download in the App Store and win big with player props today. And really, I can't speak enough positively about No House Advantage. I think they do a lot of fun things over there. If you watch the tip-off show, every day there are some bets they have or some prop bets that they have. The lines just either don't make sense or are just a little bit too generous for one way. Colin Sexton hitting 9.5 3-pointers. That was one that we had the other day. That's something that has never happened in the real life. And that is something that's going to be an advantage for you guys playing at No House Advantage. So make sure you're using our projections that Awesemo has here for No House Advantage, but play over there. Really my highest recommendations. And also make sure you're checking out our free premium tool today, the Top Pitchers tool. Thing that we reference a lot throughout the show is a free one. So if you haven't been playing with Awesemo today, go check out one of our free tools, one of the more important ones out there to pare down that pitching pool. And of course, if you always want to get the Awesemo Plus tools in your life, go to awesemo.com/join. We have the weekly pass for $29.95 that gives you everything for every sport, all the player projections, ownership projections, and tools and all of that. If you just want to play MLB, you can do that as well for $15.95 a week with the Awesemo Plus MLB weekly package. So go check those out at awesemo.com/join. And now I have shielded myself to death. So Terry, tell me about this slate. Any weather concerns? I feel like that's an important one that we have to hit on up top.
I think the only one I had my eye on was Colorado, where we have another chance with some rain coming down, another cold day out there. We saw them scrap the game yesterday. I think it was snowing when they scrapped it. So I think that's the only one on the board that I saw. If there's any others that I'm missing, please feel free to chime in and throw them at me. But yeah, I'm typically, the weather's like the one I try and hit the last, as we're just approaching lock. I try and crunch all my lineups out unless there's something really obvious that just needs to come off the board. So right now, it's the only one I've got my eye on.
Alex, anything weather-wise you're seeing here? I went to Terry first, knowing that you're the expert here, so you could slam dunk at home based on whatever Terry gives out. So any weather games that you're watching or have some concerns about?
I'm not seeing any risk of postponement right now, but Colorado, the weather does look pretty crummy where it's supposed to be 41 all throughout the game. So maybe that dials down the bats a little bit compared to what we normally see at Coors.
Yeah, Cody in the YouTube chat saying Denver native here. Weather is fucked in Colorado today. ZZTV, unclear if he's in Colorado, but saying Colorado will probably be postponed. It's something where, we're going to talk about the game during this show and treat it as like it is one that can go off because we've seen this happen enough times one way where, yesterday the game got postponed. We've seen games in the past play. So important to cover it as best we can with the information we have in hand right now. And no news yet about the game not playing. So we will cover it throughout the show. Let's talk about some of the top pitchers as we always do. you here. And it does seem like a slate today where, let me just sort to make sure I have the most recent top pitchers tool numbers in front of me. It looks like a Freddie Peralta slate today, Alex, where we're going to have Peralta with a 24% chance of being the top pitcher. More ownership expected for him on DraftKings than you'd like to see, but still going to be clearly one of the top pitchers on the slate. He is a guy who recently has had some issues with just giving up power. That's something we always know is there with him, but still a guy that on the year has had a 40.8% K rate going back to 2019. Those numbers a little bit less impressive, but this year definitely taking a big jump upwards. 3.2 xFIP as well. The swinging strike rate and chase rates, I think, are pretty much in line with where he's been. So maybe some regression due, Alex, but at his price point, how are you feeling about Freddie Peralta going against a Cardinals lineup that has 6 guys that strike out above league average?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even have anything to say right now. You said it all. So
cool. Show done. Good job, everybody.
But yeah, I mean, Freddie Peralta is a great strikeout guy. Not someone who goes super deep in games because of control issues. But he's got a nice matchup today versus St. Louis, who, as you were saying, has a good amount of strikeouts in their lineup. So I do feel like he's a great option. Although today, man, like we got some like huge outliers as far as pricing and value. So I think Peralta is a very good option. I don't think you need to have him.
Terry, how are you feeling about Peralta? Where Terry, of course, more of a Fanduel expert, though, definitely pays attention to both sides to make sure that he's giving the best information he can. But on Fanduel, it is always a choice there where you can only pick one pitcher, and that sometimes leaves you a little bit holding the bag with guys like Peralta if you get the bad version of him compared to the high strikeout guy we've seen recently. So how are you feeling about him on Fanduel, Terry? Are you going heavy Peralta, or are you going a different direction?
Yeah, the thing that jumps out to me, particularly on FanDuel, is the heavy ownership. We've got a big slate, a lot of at least decent pitchers and several very good pitchers to choose from, most of whom are outstripping their probability of their ownership with their probability of success. Guys who are around like 5% likely to be the top starter, but getting under 1% ownership. It makes up most of the board. So we've got a very even board top to bottom. But Peralta's at the top of it at only 8%. So it's not like he's outstripping the field at like, 15, 20% to be the top starter, but he's getting owned like it. He's owned out at 30%. So that to me is just, I'm not going to cross him off by any means, but that's a spot where my initial inclination is maybe get a little under the field and spread some of those additional ownership shares around to some of these other guys who I do like a lot. I think he's a great option. I have him in Buehler top 2 as well in my personal model. So I think there's a great spot here for him. 40.8% strikeout rate so far this year. The walks are concerning though. Like Alex said, 13.1% walk rate this year. We just saw that take the top off of Tyler Mahle. He walked 4 hitters in the first 3 innings yesterday, ended up coming out after 5 1/3 when he should have probably cruised to a quality start for us. So it was still a good start, but it can make the difference between a good start and a great start. And on a slate this size, that might make all the difference.
So you mentioned Walker Buehler there. He is the price point pivot on both DraftKings and FanDuel for Freddie Peralta today, and probably the guy people will be going to in lineups where they're not getting Peralta. On DraftKings, looks like he'll have about 32% ownership. On FanDuel, it'll be closer to 20%, but still easily the number 2 chalkiest pitcher on the slate. Well, I guess we have one more guy to talk about for DraftKings who's not at this price point, but Buehler on the year, the strikeouts have been reasonable, a 27% K rate for him. He is a 28.8% guy going back to 2019. The 3 xFIP for him shows pretty good run prevention skills, even though the BABIP has been pretty much aligned with where it's been historically. And Terry, you mentioned Buehler as a pivot. He's going against a Seattle team with only a 2.7 implied run total. Buehler pitching more deep into games, not giving up as many walks. Is he a guy that you're viewing as somebody you're willing to take the chalk on there, or are you just going a different direction entirely?
Yeah, no, I will probably get to more Buehler. I'm not sure about more than the field, but I'll have more of him, I think, than Peralta. Between the two, I get a little bit higher projection on Buehler. I think it's just a much better matchup. You're going against a league average Cardinals team with Peralta, where you're going against a pretty below average team with the Mariners with Buehler here. Mariners active roster is 8th worst in baseball against righties this season, 25.4% strikeout rate, collective 152 team ISO, creating runs 7% worse than average against righties. You mentioned Buehler able to go deep in starts. He's made 6 starts, thrown 37 innings, so a decent shot at getting the quality start here. Should have a good shot at getting the win, and all the numbers are right there. I mean, his strikeout rate is right about where you want it to be, where we expect it to be. So yeah, I'm on board. 1.4% walk rate. If you need another indicator to go with it, under 1.0 whip. I love the pitcher.
Alex, how are you feeling about Bueller? Because I know we've sort of picked bones with him on some shows recently where there've been, higher strikeout guys in that stud range. But today in this spot against Seattle, you have a lot of easy strikeouts in there. You say Kikuchi too at the bottom of the order has been not the biggest sample size, but a 50% strikeout rate guy in the majors that going against righties so far. And Bueller, it does seem a safe option in a lot of ways, pitching fairly deep into games, low run total. How are you feeling about Bueller today on the slate where there is an overpowering stud to go to in lieu of him?
Yeah, I do see Bueller as the biggest favorite on the board here, which is kind of a gift and a curse because, that means a lot of people are going to be rostering him kind of just because he's got a good matchup, good chance at the win. But I don't feel like his strikeout upside is as high as the other guys. Seattle is a plus strikeout matchup, so it's not that. It's just that his baseline number is 27% this year, which is good, but it's not 10K good. So I do feel like he might be a little bit overowned today, but a great pitcher nonetheless.
We got a question here from 3 Run Shot in the chat here asking about John Means, and he is a guy coming off of one of the many no-hitters we've seen recently, and I guess we can talk about him up top. And John Means is a guy historically that I've certainly liked more. I know our pal Josh Engelman was a popular debate point with him and John Means where he did not buy the stuff. And I think if you look at John Means so far this year, he's made some meaningful improvements, and maybe it is early season luck, but he's faced over 160 batters so far this year, has a 16% strike rate, a little bit under that. The chase rate's up to just shy of 34%, whereas going back to 2019, only an 11% swing strike rate, chase rate closer to 33%. And I think the strikeout rate, 30%, maybe it doesn't hold given the fact that he is basically an under league average strikeout pitcher going back the last few seasons. But Alex, it does seem like there's been some meaningful improvements, and I think you have to expect some regression from Means, and I think the price tag is really the issue that I would have. But how are you feeling about him in this spot where you are paying up there, but you're paying up for a guy who you're clearly paying for the results of the last week?
Yeah, I mean, he just is coming off a no-hitter, like you mentioned. So, in general, like I feel like that's not really predictive of the next game's performance at all. Although it was 6 days ago, he threw 113 pitches, so I don't expect him to be like limited or anything in that regard. But Baltimore is an underdog to New York today. The Mets lineup doesn't have a great number of strikeouts in it, and the biggest thing is just the price of over 10K on both DraftKings and Fanduel is way too high for me, so I don't think I'm gonna get to him.
Terry, how are you feeling about Means? And Alex mentioned he has been pitching fairly deep into games, a little bit over 6.5 innings per start. So there are some positive things to go there. It just does seem, if you look through the numbers, perhaps the guy is getting a little bit luckier than he should so far this year. A 135 batting average allowed along with a 160 BABIP.
Yeah, and that's really the story of John Means to me, is he's a pitcher who has gotten lucky throughout his career and particularly this season. So that has just been somebody that he is. He's been good at limiting hard contact for the most part this year. He gets by with basically a 2-pitch arsenal. He's got a pretty nice fastball and a very good changeup. And the difference this year so far has been that his changeup has kind of settled into a nice spot. It's got a 9.6 mile an hour differential. He's induced 22 of his 49 strikeouts this year on the changeup. And then he's got a pretty heavy spin four-seamer, and he's induced another 20 of those 49 strikeouts with the four-seamer. But that pitch has a 550 expected slugging percentage against, while the other three are below 200. So there's the probability that that's going to come back to earth. The strikeouts are going to come back to earth. That fastball is going to start getting hit hard and getting hit for runs here. So Means is a pitcher I do not believe in. I think the price is outrageous, completely wrong on both sides, despite the no-hitter. So yeah, give me some Mets bats here. I wish he was higher owned by the public, honestly, because I'm getting nice indicators on the Mets bats, nice power indicators on the Mets bats.
Yeah, Means, it looks like on DraftKings projected from their 5% ownership. So if you are a big believer in John Means and want to go back there, you certainly can. And a lot of the field won't be there, but they're just cheaper options, I think, to go to on the slate. I don't mind taking flyers on them because the numbers have been there, but definitely been getting lucky. And I think Terry's point about just expecting things to get a little worse for him, that could be the difference between a good day and a bad day if you're playing an overpriced John Means and he just has a mediocre outing, I think is something important to keep in mind. Let's talk about Brady Singer. And guys, hit that like button here. We appreciate it a bunch here. I mentioned a lot on these shows, but we need the love on MLB shows more than ever, where for the NBA shows, obviously doing a great job, whether we have people's eyebrows on the line or not, getting a lot of likes and attention on there as people love playing NBA, but MLB a little bit slower to start this year. So we need your help combating all the algorithms and all that YouTube throws out and our obstacles in front of us right now. So hit that like button and subscribe to the channel as well if you want to get content all day long for the MLB, NBA, PGA, MMA, every sport that's out there right now. We've got something. Brady Singer, chalk play today on DraftKings, Alex, and he is a pay down option that's been pitching decently deep into games, a little bit under 5 innings to start, getting reasonable strikeout stuff. The home run power, not giving up a lot of that this year, only a 1.6% home run rate. I feel like Singer is a perfectly fine pitcher, but a guy this chalky on a slate of this size, Alex, how are you feeling about him, even if he is going against Detroit?
Yeah, this one is really tricky to navigate because Singer has a ridiculous price point of 5,700. Now, if we look at his stuff, I feel like he's around league average pitcher. He has a 23.6% strikeout rate. That's within 1% of the league average this year. And then he's got a great matchup versus Detroit, who has strikeouts in it and not a lot of good batters. So overall, I think this is a pretty good spot for Singer. And this price point of 5,700, that's like what we expect out of like a scrub spot. So this being above average spot, I feel like he's massively underpriced, but that can be kind of a trap in MLB DFS because there are a lot of other good pitchers on the slate. And I found that the last time we had a situation like this with Heaney, I think, who was way underpriced, I did find it was a little bit better to go to some other options that might not be quite as good value, but overall better pitchers. So I'm a little bit torn, but I can't critique anyone who ends up with Singer because that price point is ridiculous at DraftKings.
Terry, would you want to go Singer's way on DraftKings? And he is also a value play on Fanduel, not quite the same situation, and certainly not an option that you have to go to there, but he will be, looks like has the top 3 odds of being a top pitcher on Fanduel. So give me your DraftKings thoughts for him, and then segue over, if you can, to how you'd handle him on Fanduel.
Yeah, I mean, the price on DraftKings is extremely interesting. They need to take about $2,000 off the top of John Means and put it on to Brady Singer. Fix both prices. 5,700. Yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer. Just lock and load some of that value in spots and make sure you're spending your salary wisely. Get to good stacks and maybe an offbeat high-end SP1 to pair with him. Maybe you don't go directly to Freddie Peralta with him just because that's going to be what everybody does. So maybe you take a different path. But I think that's a fine pairing as long as you're getting the differentiated bats, of course, too. On FanDuel at 7,800, he kind of falls into more the mid-range for me. I get a decent projection on him, and I agree that he's in a great spot here, which really it's all about the matchup for me. Tigers are league worst, striking out 28.2% of the time against righties this year, 12% below average creating runs in the split. They've hit 30 home runs, which is decent, a little above league average in terms of home run hitting, but around league average with a 157 ISO against righties so far this year. Nothing to really fear here. He's just, to Alex's point, not the most talented pitcher on the board. So I might just default to going to some of these more talented guys in similar price ranges. Like I'd rather pay 85 for Lance McCullers, I think. I'd rather pay 8,000 for Pablo Lopez, I think. Those are the 2 best options.
I think Brady Singer to me looks like a perfectly fine play. It's just the issue is that he's going to be 40% owned. And I think you are relying a little more on an outcome that's not a 40% outcome of him. Not only him having a decent day or a productive day, but also having to outscore guys in that range, outscore guys who are a little bit more expensive, like Terry mentioned. So I have no issue being with the field on Singer, or at least a little bit underneath it. He has a 34% chance of being the top value. That to me looks like a decent cap for him. And I think people are saying in the chat too that, Detroit could strike out 30% in a T-ball game. Like, I don't disagree here. They have a 28% K rate against righties on the year, but I still think there's enough ways here where they can get some production going. And a Singer to me, be with the field, be a little bit under the field, but I think going crazy on Singer might not be the wisest move. Alex, is there anybody else super cheap that you would consider playing instead? I feel like there isn't. Like Matthew Boyd is kind of in the same price range. Not really seeing anybody else. I guess Bryce Wilson, who's been absolutely awful in the majors, so I don't think there's that much of a case there. But anybody else cheap-ish, if people wanted to make a direct pivot to Singer, that you would advocate for to some level?
I think I'm looking at Dylan Cease. He's faced up against Minnesota today. And they're only projected for 3.9 runs. So although Minnesota has a pretty good lineup, I think we're expecting that the sub 50-degree weather in Chicago will limit run production today. So Cease's strikeout numbers have been excellent this year at 32%. And then last year, had a really down year for strikeouts. So I feel like people may have a difficult time reconciling his 17% strikeout rate from 2020 and his 32% strikeout rate from 2021. But this is over a good sample, 125 batters. So there is a significant sample size here. And looking at the numbers here, his fastball velocity is down from 97.6% to 97.6 miles per hour to 96.4 this year. But 96.4 is excellent. It's just kind of begging the question, how is he not getting any strikeouts with a 97 mile an hour fastball last year? Swinging strike rate is up from 9.5 to 13. So I'm willing to buy in a little bit to the idea that Cease has found his groove this year. I'm interested to hear what Terry's thinking about Cease here.
Terry, you have any thoughts on Cease? And I'll throw one more stat into the mix too. The chase rate up to 34.2% this year from 29% going back to last season and 29.5 since 2019. Does seem like he's made some improvements even with a little bit less on the velocity meter, Terry. But how are you feeling about Cease as an option? And if you have him in play on FanDuel too, feel free to throw that in as well.
Yeah, this is one of my guys, and I am happy to see that he's seems like he's finally arrived. I've been talking about this kid for the last year and a half and saying he's going to be an elite strikeout artist once the stuff starts working. I think maybe shaving a little bit of that velocity off the four-seamer is helping him out with his control, with his commands. So I think that's a good change for him here. It's not one of those cases where a guy like Zach Greinke goes from 91 to 87 and all of a sudden is throwing his fastball the same velo as his changeup. This is a good change most likely for this kid. Everything is working incredibly effectively. He's a super heavy spin arsenal, 2606 on the fastball, 2,862 RPMs on the slider, which is just a devastating pitch. I love everything about the kid. Tough spot against the Twins lineup. They're good for power upside. I get decent home run marks from them here, but I expect a strong start out of Cease here. 32% strikeout rate on the year. If he puts a few too many guys on base, he is still walking 12% of hitters. He could get himself in trouble. That's the one thing to worry about. But the price is right. 8,200 is fair on FanDuel. 7,000 is a bargain on DK. Love the spot.
Terry, anybody else that you want to throw into the mix here at pitcher? I feel like we could probably talk about a lot of these guys. And I do actually, let's talk about Robbie Ray real fast, because I do think he's an interesting case to hit on. The price tag a little bit higher up on a guy like Dylan Cease. And I think we're all in agreement that's a play that you're taking on some risk going against those Minnesota bats, but a cold day probably going to help out Cease more. But Robbie Ray is a pitcher who I think, we've seen him start to make some strides in figuring out that strikeout rate a little bit more. Had some pretty big upside his last outing. And he's at a 25% K rate now so far this year with less walks and a pretty decent margin, a 1.15 whip on the year. His xFIP has also been down to 3.9 xFIP. And he is facing an Atlanta team that, much like Minnesota, has a good amount of power, but still has some guys that strike out. They're striking out at a 27% clip this year against lefties, 6 guys that strike out above league average, not even including the pitcher against lefties. Are you seeing anything at all with Robbie Ray that makes him jump out? Because I'm intrigued by him. I think it's a lot of risk to be taking on a slate of this size, but it does seem like there's been some meaningful improvements.
Yeah, I don't know. He's just earned so much distrust from me over the years with his, ridiculous wildness and his walk rate and everything where it's been, that when you do capture those nice strikeout games from Robbie Ray, it's great, but I just am a little risk averse, and that's baked into my model somewhat here with the old numbers over the sample. So I don't get the biggest projection for him for the money. I think he's all right. He's fine. I think we're also maybe chasing some numbers for Atlanta that are probably a little wonky earlier in the season. 27.3% strikeout rate. Yeah, very bad for them against lefty pitching. That would put them sixth worst in the league. 55 WRC plus, so 45% worse than average creating runs against lefties so far this year, and they've only hit 6 home runs against lefties this year. A lot of power outage for some reason for the Braves here, but I don't know that I want to chase that. This is a lineup that I really respect. There's a lot of excellent right-handed hitting in it. I just don't love the spot. So a pitcher I don't trust, a lineup that I do think more of than their numbers have shown here, it's probably not for me.
Alex, it's a pretty high total here, so that's part of, I think, what factors in with what Terry's talking about. The Braves probably do just have better results based upon, you go through this lineup. You have Acuna who hits lefties well, Ozuna hits lefties well, Albies, Riley, really all these guys, even Christian Pache hit lefties pretty well. So it does seem odd that they've been this bad on the year, but how are you feeling about Robbie Ray's prospects in this spot going against Atlanta?
Yeah, I think Ray is pretty risky. He has a 25% K rate this year, which is good, but not great. It is a good matchup for Ks, but Atlanta's lineup is quite a bit better than your average MLB lineup. So I do see that there are some strikeout props of Ray that are around 7.5 that I just really don't understand at all. I have him at 6. So if you're using those numbers, I would take the under. Overall, I think he's a decent DFS play because there's a ton of variance here, but I'm not exactly sure why people are so high on his strikeouts.
Terry, do you have anybody you want to throw into the mix? I have a few more guys that I could suggest, but I feel like I'd rather get a guy who you feel pretty confident in. So any pitchers you want to suggest to the people out there as being one of your priority plays?
I don't know about priority play, but I think Mad Bum's certainly interesting going up against Miami here. I wrote about
That's actually where I was going to go, Terry. So I'm intrigued. He's apparently the most under-owned pitcher on the top pitcher stool for DK. So that feels good.
Yeah, that was something that really jumped out to me when I was writing up my article this afternoon. And he's been good. 36 innings over his first 7 starts, 4.25 xFIP, 109 whip, 26.5% strikeout rate. He was at 15.8% strikeouts last season and a 5.85 xFIP in his 41 inning 2020. So he was really ugly last year and was, tarnished reputation coming into this season. But looking back, like he had those bumpy years at the end with the Giants as well. But if you look back, his low point was a 4.32 xFIP. Like, yeah, he wasn't Madison Bumgarner anymore, but that's also not terrible. He was at 19.8% strikeout rate. That's well below league average in 2018, but that was also the low point. So I don't think he fell off nearly as far as maybe we were thinking he did. And if he's clawing his way back to where he used to be, I want to be there ahead of the curve. So if the public's not going to be on him, I'm all over that spot. Career 3.58 xFIP, 23.7% strikeout rate over 1,900 inning sample. There's enough there that I can believe and get back on the Mad Bum train pretty early here. So I like that spot.
Alex, how are you feeling about Bumgarner here? Because he does seem under-owned according to the top stacks tool. And if people do look at that longer-term sample size, definitely does not jump out as good, but his velocity has been up, which I think is definitely one cosign here where he had an 89.4 mile per hour fastball going back to last season. Now he's up to 90.6. And as Terry mentioned, the strikeout rate's been there for him. Are you willing to go to Madison Bumgarner at a price tag that a little lofty for what we know of him from the last 2 years?
Yeah, I think he's worth taking a few stabs on just due to the ownership alone. I mean, 2.4% on Draftkings and 0.8% on Fanduel. Miami's lineup today, we're not projecting to be very good, except they strike out a lot. So it's best of both worlds, like a bad lineup that strikes out. So 26% Ks on the year is pretty encouraging. I think people might just kind of be clinging on to the idea that he's washed, even though he's been having a good year so far.
Let's talk quickly about Dinelson Lamet, and on the hopes that this game goes off, and he's a pitcher that does have a pretty good projection right now, Alex. And I think the price tag too on DraftKings maybe reflects that he wasn't expected to be pitching today, and now this game being postponed means that he's probably going to be going here, or the assumption is that he's going to be going. And he didn't. I mean, he hasn't pitched fairly deep so far this year. Only had that, I think, one start. Getting 2 innings into that one, but the projection we have does seem like like the data is saying that he's going to be getting a full amount of runs. So how are you handling him today, given the fact that he's probably one of the most live arms on the slate based on what we know historically?
Yeah, I keep tweaking his projection because this one is really tough to nail down. He's played 2 games and gotten injured in both of them, I think, because the pitch counts were like 30 in both. So that it's just a little bit hard to trust him after that. The last one was 7 days ago. So to be honest, I don't have a great feel for how deep he's going to go. And then he's in Coors Field, which should lower his strikeout numbers. But of the 60-ish pitches he's thrown this year, I mean, he's got a 95-mile-an-hour fastball. Down a little bit, but that's still good stuff. So I think I might hold off until we see what happens today.
Terry, any thoughts on Lamet or anybody else that you want to hit on the slate, just so we can fully cover pitching as best we can, or there's too many guys to talk about at any sort of depth?
Yeah, Lamet for me, when he's going right, one of my favorite pitchers to look at in the league. Just devastating stuff, amazing strikeout stuff. I just don't know that we're going to get more than 3 innings out of him here. The Padres have been using him a lot in tandem with Ryan Weathers, their rookie, having one start and the other, or having Lamet start and then Weathers come in. Weathers just pitched on, I think, Sunday, 2 days ago. So that's unlikely to happen today, but they've still got a full bullpen behind him. I do not think we're going to get enough Dinelson Lamet here to be interesting or relevant at that price at 9,000 on FanDuel, 7,400 on DK. If you wanted to mix it in, hope that you get 3 innings and 6 strikeouts out of him, I guess you could do that. But like, if you're looking for a guy like that who's unlucky to get a win, I'd rather go to Luis Patino, honestly, going up against the Yankees for 5,500. He's a strikeout artist as well. He could give you 3 innings. He's only likely to go 3 or 4. He could give you 3 innings, 6 strikeouts in maybe a safer spot than Coors Field. I just think Lamet, you're gambling with the fact that his arm might fly off at any minute. So that's really the tricky part here. That combined with Coors Field is a stay away from me.
All right, we got to do some money time, give away the top 5 owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel. But Alex, I just want to ask you the same question I asked Terry. Anybody else at pitcher that you just want to throw out there because you see them as being worth having exposure and we just haven't touched on them at all?
Well, it sucks that Bieber's not on the slate because I would really like him if he was. But I don't think there's any pitchers standing out as like really bad. There's just a bunch in that mediocre range. So if there's someone that you're liking, I think you're probably fine.
All right. And also the Rays lineup is out and I do not have Kevin Padlo on my sheet. And some of these names I do not like. That's not even a name. Padlo, Padlo. Like I don't want to, I mean, my name is stupid too. I get that, but I feel like as I have the carte blanche then to insult somebody else's name.
Oh, it's Padlo without even a W on it too. Yeah, that is a weird one.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's a lazy name is what it is. Padlock, Padlo with a W, maybe even a W and E. You could sound like a character in Love Actually, but instead we get Padlo, Padlo, whatever. Let's do money time here. And as always, the ownership projections are available for you guys at awesemo.com/join. But when I am doing a live show here, I like to try to give away the top 5 owned plays for you guys out there, so you get a peek on how the slate's going to be looking. And we'll do our chalk talk as well real fast. Let's just see how it's going. And I always appreciate Alec going with the hat gimmick too.
This one you can't see the dollar sign, but I show you there is one.
You know what? There's a dollar sign in all of us, I think, as long as we try. Like Care Bears. If you believe, then it comes through. Top 5 on DraftKings. Number 1, Brady Singer, 38% expected ownership, according to our Awesemo ownership projections that you can get for yourself at awesemo.com/join. Number 2, Fernando Tatis, 37% on DraftKings. Number 3, Freddie Peralta, 34%. Number 4, Walker Buehler at 33%. And number 5, Trent Grisham at 28%. So that Padres stack going to be one we're going to talk about a lot here in the back half of the show. On FanDuel, the top 5, number 1, Fernando Tatis, 33%. Number 2, Freddie Peralta, 30%. Number 3, Garrett Cooper at 28.5%. Number 4, Trey Turner at 27%. And number 5, Juan Soto at 23%. So there are your top 5 owned plays. And I guess the question I would have, and I think the configuration is going to be a little bit up in the air, but Tyler, if you could pull up the Fantasy Cruncher, and I said the Fantasy Cruncher like I'm an old parent here talking about Twitter or Facebook or something. Pull up the Fantasy Cruncher, please. And I think, Alex, the configuration that seems chalky would be Peralta or Buehler and Singer. So I think those are the ones we should lock in. Are you in agreement?
Sure.
All right, so let's do that. Let's lock in those guys. And what we do here with this Chalk Talk segment here, a real quick one, is just give you guys a read on how this looks for probably how a lot of people are going to be approaching the slate, which they pick the pitcher they like. They just kind of let the optimizer do the work from there. And it's helpful to figure that out because if you know how people are going to be going here as sort of the baseline, optimal lineup, you can figure out which stacks to avoid or which stacks to try to get different with. So we'll see what Tyler has when he pulls up this crunch. Drum roll, please.
Spags,
Tyler's so busy mining Bitcoin.
I accidentally closed it. Sorry, chat.
So yeah, Tyler's apparently working on mining some altcoins, not Bitcoin even. So he's too busy doing that to give us the stacks that I so desperately need to make content for and bring joy to millions. Do. This is pressure too. I'm enjoying just watching Tyler.
Yeah, I did just see a message that we are experiencing some known issues with Fantasy Cruncher right now, and the team is working on it behind the scenes. So if anybody else out there is struggling with getting into it, that
I want
could be
a formal apology, Spags. I want a formal apology.
It just seems like Tyler doesn't know what he's doing on
Awesemo.com. My team will issue a formal apology to you.
All right, so no chalk talk for today. We'll see if it pops back up because Tyler broke Fantasy Cruncher. So we apologize on behalf of Tyler breaking Fantasy Cruncher for all you guys out there. But stay with it if you're having issues. Apparently they'll sort themselves out soon enough. But let's talk about some of the top stacks then, and ones that probably will appear alongside those Brady Singer and Peralta combinations. And that seems like the Padres is the one that we have to hit on up top. They have a 16% chance of being that top stack, assuming the Coors game goes off. Only actually a lot of ownership expected on Draftkings. On Fanduel as well, looks like they'll be very well represented, as you can see from that top 5. And Alex, San Diego team in Coors pitching against, looks like Antonio Senzatella, who we've talked about, I think, recently enough that we don't need to drill it too much. A guy doesn't get strikeouts, doesn't give up a ton of home runs, but still a not good pitcher at Coors. Are you buying in on this Padres chalk? Because this is a team that there is no part you could point to, I guess, besides Jerks and Profar that will not be highly owned.
Yeah, I mean, the ownership on the Padres we're projecting is very high. So that is a negative, but they're in the best park versus a pitcher that is either average, below average. So I think this is a great spot. Can't really criticize anyone for going to Padres here. So the one part I'm not sure about is whether this game will happen. I mean, I don't see any reason it wouldn't, but there seems to be this narrative that maybe they would postpone another one. And the reason this is important to me isn't because I'm worried about it being postponed. It's because that could drive down the ownership a little bit. But I don't feel like the chance of precipitation during this game is high enough to really dissuade people from going to it. So what do you guys think? Do you think people are going to be scared off at all?
Terry, what are you thinking here? Because it does seem like people certainly risk averse, and the ownership does, sort of encapsulate the ideal situation for people and how they're going to approach the ownership. So are you thinking San Diego ends up as owned as we're projecting right now, Terry?
I could see it being realistically a little bit lower based on that, people being a little bit hesitant to go to these weather games, particularly when we've had a few cancel post-lock and people get burnt, or, the situation where there were a few where we were able to swap off of them, but people just don't want to deal with that. A lot of people like to set their lineups at lock and not worry about it except for checking scores. So I could see the narrative where it comes down. The question is, particularly on DK, it's not like we're talking about Fernando Tatis going from 36% owned to 15% owned, I don't think. Maybe it comes down from 36 to 28. Is that going to make all the difference in the world? Probably not. You're still going to need to find different ways to roster this team in terms of which stack you're putting them as your second stack, what your overall construction looks like, which pitchers you're using, et cetera, et cetera. I do think they're a little interesting on FanDuel, where a guy like Eric Hosmer hitting in the middle of that lineup projected for only 5.7% ownership. That's a little bit more playable. Jake Cronenworth hitting from the left side of the plate, 6.1%. So you get a little bit more flexibility in what you can put together with that lineup where they're not all getting dramatically owned. So maybe a little bit more interesting for me on FanDuel than they would be on DK. I mean, they're interesting just given the ballpark, the pitching matchup, and all of that. There's every reason to go here. I just kind of like the look of it better on FanDuel.
And shout out to our guy. He made it happen, always on the boots on the ground here in Colorado, because he's not too far away from Coors Field, saying, be careful the Colorado game. Thought it'd be a go earlier, but it hasn't stopped raining all day. And there's a percentage of rain from 7 to 9 p.m. So keep that in mind here. Obviously, with anything with baseball, you guys know at this point, pay close attention, and things can change on a whim. So we'll talk about some of the other stacks that will pop up if we do have Colorado and San Diego taken off the board. And it does seem like some of the other top stacks amongst these teams on FanDuel. Toronto looks like the number 2 stack overall on FanDuel, Terry. So take me through there. They look a little bit overowned, but Toronto's certainly a team that we know has enough pop to do damage on any size slate.
Yeah, it's a lineup that we like getting to in the right spots. They're a team with, loaded up with some young talent here. So going up against Bryce Wilson, who I don't think any of us really think much of as a major league pitcher, and then probably getting into this Atlanta pen pretty early. I think it's a good spot for this Blue Jays team. I'm just getting over to them in my model here. They don't pop as much as I would have thought in terms of my home run model, but I get nice projections up and down the lineup. And it's a lineup that goes at least 1 through 7. And then if you want to throw Danny Jansen playing in a National League park, if you want to throw Danny Jansen in there as a catcher option, he's only 2,100 on the Fanduel slate, under 1% owned, getting around 10% ownership, but only costs 2,600 on the DK slate. I think he's a fine catcher mix-in option. Obviously struggling to do anything with his hit tool, but he's got a little bit of pop in that bat. He's hit 3 home runs in 75 plate appearances this year, 6 last year, and 147 plate appearances. So forgive the 101, 173, 246 slash. That's pretty ugly. So maybe you get to him as a catcher play if you're going there. But yeah, 1 through 7, I like this lineup a lot.
Alex, how are you feeling about Toronto? And as Terry mentioned, some of the stats of Bryce Wilson have not been good. Going back to 2019, has faced 222 batters, 315 batting average allowed, under a 17% K rate, 5% on run rate, 264 ISO allowed. Everything looks very bad for Bryce Wilson, but we have sometimes seen these guys have just a mediocre day, just kind of balance things out because it's still a major league arm. So how are you feeling about Toronto going against the pitcher who I think unequivocally looks like the worst arm on the slate?
Yeah, I think Toronto looks solid. The weather here is pretty neutral. It's going to be about 70 during this game, so not really making me love or dislike Toronto anymore. So I think the matchup is solid. They're projected for 5.2 runs, which is pretty good. Prices are high on the key guys, which can be good because it'll drive down the ownership a little bit, particularly Vlad Guerrero. Being quite expensive, so he could be a good contrarian spot. The thing I would avoid here is if you just let the optimizer roll, it will probably give you a lot of guys towards the bottom of the lineup because they're dirt cheap, like Biggio, Gurriel, and Jansen. You might be better off just kind of spending up for the best guys and then spending down at pitcher. I feel like that might give you an edge over those guys who spend down and then just have a little bit better pitching on their lineup.
Yeah, basically the same ownership, it looks like, going, as Alex mentioned, to guys like Biggio, Gurriel, and Jansen, as there is going to Marcus Semien up top and Bo Bichette. And nobody appears will be rostering Vlad Guerrero, which seems like a bit of an oversight, perhaps, in this situation. The same thing for Randall Grichuk, and a guy who has a good amount of pop as well, just shy of a 5% on run rate against righties since 2019. So some ways to stack up Toronto and get less ownership than the field. And I would agree. I think, to me, they seem like a stack you can get creative with in some ways here against a pitcher who just hasn't had much in the majors. And maybe that changes someday, but it has not been there today. Let's talk about Houston, because they also seem to be a top 3 stack and pretty much on both sites for sure. And they are a team that somebody was asking in the chat, and my apologies for forgetting who it was, but asking about Shohei Ohtani, why we weren't talking about him in the pitcher segment. And somebody mentioned, the volatility of Ohtani, giving up a lot of walks. The strikeout rate has been there for him, a 36% K rate. He's not pitching that deep in the game, so that's sort of the argument I think you could make against Ohtani. But his wildness, Alex, does seem like it offers potential against Houston, a team that only has a 19% K rate against righties on the year. The aggregate lineup about the same mark as well. And do you think they are in a spot to take advantage of Ohtani without a ton of ownership going their way?
Well, Ohtani's interesting. We didn't mention him on the pitching side, but he has been very good this year at the 36% K rate. A little bit limited sample, but he did go 85 pitches in his last game. It's not a great matchup on the pitching side or the hitting side for that reason, really, because he is a tough pitcher, but Houston does have a lineup that's quite talented. So maybe a contrarian spot here.
Terry, how are you feeling about Houston's hitters in the situation where they are potentially a top 3 stack, though? That ownership is, or that potential here, mostly flat. So you're not getting a big discrepancy between them and, numbers 4 and 5 necessarily. But how are you feeling about the Astros going against Ohtani? Do you think they can get something going against a guy who's given up just a 111 batting average so far this year?
Yeah, it's a very good lineup, to your point. 19.4% strikeout rate against righties this season, 182. Team ISO is one of the leading marks in the league, 116 WRC plus, so creating runs 16% better than average. Definitely a good lineup top to bottom. It's just Ohtani, like Alex was saying, this is a good pitcher. Do I want to go to Ohtani for DFS purposes? 9,000 on FanDuel? I don't think so. I get a projection that puts him in the middle of the pack and around some guys who are significantly less expensive against worse lineups. So I don't know that I want to get to Ohtani. Maybe on DK at 7,400 you can take some mix and match shares, but I think it's just a good lineup going up against a good pitcher. I don't want to be guessing with too many of my lineups as to which side of this one's going to come through. They both it's kind of splitting down the middle for me, so I'm not sure how much of either one I'll get. I think if I had to call one, gun to my head, I would take the Astros bat side of it, though.
Let's talk about the Yankees. And Terry, I know you mentioned the pitcher that they'll be going against, at least for the opening of this game from Tampa Bay, Luis Patino, but the Yankees do seem to be one of the more under-owned teams on DraftKings and also under-owned on Fanduel. They're not quite as much of a margin there, but they are a team that we know has pop. They're playing in a park that the factors are not going to benefit them. Not a lot of power, roof closed in Tampa Bay, but they are the Yankees. They have a ton of bats here that can do some damage. How are you feeling about them as both your team of choice in real life and a fantasy team that is definitely more owned or less owned rather than they were earlier in the year where they were chalk every single day?
Yeah, definitely have come down in popularity a little bit, particularly on a big slate, which could make them nice and sneaky in this spot. So I will be getting to Yankees if nobody else does. And it's not nobody, but their ownership is definitely down from where I think it ought to be in this spot. They're getting Patino probably for 3 innings, maybe for 4 if they really stretch him, but he's not going to give us a full start here. He is a high-end kid in terms of his strikeout rate, 37% strikeout rate over his only 7 innings this year, 24.7% last year in 17 innings, and has done well with the strikeouts through the minors so far. But it's just about the length there for him. I think there's significant upside for a Yankees lineup that's going to be getting Luke Voit back today. So we've got some power added to the lineup, as well as kind of an underrated hit tool. Somewhat depends on how this lineup falls. Like the projected had Gio Urshela hitting 4th, which I don't necessarily agree with. That's where the lineup's going to come together. With Voit coming back, I think he'll probably slot into that 4 spot, maybe Torres 5th. But regardless of how it comes together, I think there are good ways to roster this Yankees lineup. And if you get some of those guys mixed in toward the top of the lineup when people aren't necessarily expecting it, aren't necessarily going there, I think that could be surprising. And you've got nice prices on some of these hitters as well.
Alex, how are you feeling about the Yankees? And give me your thoughts if they look like a better play to you on DraftKings and FanDuel, because it does seem like the DraftKings leverage definitely more appreciably higher than they are on FanDuel.
Yeah, I think, you got one of the best lineups in the league here, and the park in Tropicana is not great, and the matchup's not great, but I think the talent's worth gambling on, given the ownership. So I think it could be worth just punting pitcher, maybe going with some Cease and Singer, and then stacking up some Yankees that are going to be low owned. I think you could win that way.
Let's try to, I guess, speed around through some of these teams here, and you guys can just give me a quick cosign or not. And we'll go one by one. But because I feel like there's a lot of teams here that seem flat, and I just want to see if any of them spark your interest or spike it, whatever you want to say. Oakland seems like they are the number 4 probability here to be a top stack, though it's a very narrow margin for really all these teams this mid range. Alex, are you seeing yourself with Oakland or no?
Well, it's in Fenway. That's a very good park, especially coming from their normal park. And I like the narrative value because they just announced today that Oakland might be moving their team. So maybe these guys will have a little bit more to play for.
Terry, how about you in Oakland?
Yeah, that's a spot I think I can get to. Eovaldi, I'm getting a middling projection on Eovaldi going the other way. So it's probably a spot where I would be more inclined to take the bats. I'm not sure if I'll get to either one in significant degrees, but if I was, it would be more Oakland bats than Eovaldi. Hit some hitters I like in there. Matt Olson leaps to mind. Mitch Moreland against a righty is always in play. Matt Chapman, of course. So definitely a good lineup that I like to get to, particularly if they're under-owned.
Yeah, and it looks like the ownership for Oakland largely going on DraftKings and Matt Olson and Mark Canha. So if you want to omit one of those guys or go a different direction, you could definitely find some guys. I feel like the 3 through 7 or projected 3 through 7 have more than enough pop where you can get different there. So I think maybe leaving Canha off wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, or at least one of Canha or Olson. Another stack here. Terry, I'll ask you first. Philadelphia, how are you feeling about their prospects here? Another team here, just mostly flat in terms of their potential to be a top stack with Oakland.
Yeah, I get decent numbers on Philly, and they're not all that expensive, particularly on the FanDuel slate. You've got Harper coming in at 4,100, and then the next most expensive guy is Real Muto at 34, and everybody well below that after that. So that's a lineup you can put together in interesting ways, get to expensive pitchers, and not be sacrificing, at least in my numbers, in my opinion here, much upside at all going up against a pitcher that I don't think much of in Eric Fede. 23.5% strikeout rate puts him around league average-ish over his 27 innings, but over 50 innings last year, he was a 12.6% strikeout guy, 5.22 xFIP. This year he's a 4.13 xFIP, still a 1.32 whip, walking 10.9% of hitters. I can definitely throw some Phillies bats at that.
Yeah, Fede going back to 2019, just the 14.4% carry rate. So it seems like he should have some negative regression going the other way, given the fact his swinging strike rate and or his chase rate are up that much. But Alex, how are you feeling about this Philly stack?
Yeah, I think let's see. Phillies, yeah, Fede has been kind of interesting this year, coming out of nowhere to have a pretty decent strikeout rate. But the Phillies, I mean, I think that's a pretty good matchup for them, and they're the road team, which is nice for the extra inning if they're rolling. So I think they look like a pretty good stack to get you tonight.
Alex, how are you feeling about Washington on the other side of this game? Because they look like one of the most over-owned stacks, according to the top stacks tool. 13% aggregate ownership expected, 5.2% chance being a top stack. So they're right there with Philly in terms of the potential, but are going to be twice as owned. It's a good matchup against Chase Anderson, who's been pretty bad on the year and bad historically. Only an 18% K rate and only a 5.4 xFIP this year. But how are you feeling about Washington? Because they are really owned, and Soto in particular is going to be, I guess Soto and Josh Bell on DraftKings, both very highly owned.
Yeah, I think the Washington stack is just really cheap with the 3 and 4 hitters in the mid 3Ks on DraftKings. So I do feel like a lot of people are going to naturally gravitate towards this team. And Soto and Turner are priced normally, but they're fantastic players, so it's definitely worth it. But when you combine all that, the matchup's fine, but they're the home team. That is a little bit of a negative in my opinion. And let me look at the weather here. It looks like it's going to be low 60s, so not great conditions for baseball. So I don't mind betting against Washington here.
Terry, how are you feeling about Washington? Seems like it's the same situation on FanDuel, one of the more over-owned teams, and in a good spot on paper. But as Alex mentioned, the hitting conditions not fantastic, and you're paying a steep ownership price tag for all these guys.
Yeah, I like the spot for the guys at the top of the lineup, the top 4 at least, from Turner, Soto, Bell, and Schwarber here in terms of their probability of hitting a home run, maybe 2 home runs. The problem is they're not good for one-offs here. And the stack is going to be really highly owned around that concentration of hitters, that group of guys that I want to get to. As you get further down the lineup, it's not the greatest lineup in terms of turning it over and bringing it back around to the top of that lineup. I do like Victor Robles as a player. I think there's a lot of upside there. His hit tool will eventually come around. He's going to have a nice little, 15 to 25 type upside when he really hits as a player. He's just not there yet. So I don't love going down to the bottom of this lineup and wrapping it around to the top like I normally do. So I'm just not sure how it'll come together for me. I might grab some shares on FanDuel of Josh Bell at 12% as a one-off, grab some home run upside there. The other guys in the 20s, I don't know if I want to get there as much on this size slate as a one-off. I'll have some shares of it, but not a ton. I'll probably be under the field overall in national shares.
And Terry, quick question from the chat, which we try to make sure we're covering stuff as best we can in terms of the overall approach for you guys, because MLB DFS can be tough to jump into if you're trying to figure it out, the overall correlations and stacking all of that. Aaron Toller in the YouTube chat asking for FanDuel, do you recommend going to 4-3 stacks? And Terry, do you want to just field that one real fast, give people your approach?
I usually have a nice blend of 4-4s, 4-3s, and then I'll mix in a few lineups with some more offbeat constructions, 3-3-2s, and things like that. We saw Steve just win one last night with, I think, a 4-2-1-1 on FanDuel. That was a much shorter slate. Shorter slates, I'm more inclined to mix up the constructions like that because it's easier to you have less likelihood of 2 teams going off completely, where on a big slate like this, we probably are going to get that eventuality. So it's more apt to throw more full stacks at a big slate. So I'm looking more to do 4-4s and 4-3s on a slate of this size.
Alex, let's jump back to the stacks and talk about Colorado. I'm taking requests in the chat because we're not going to be able to cover every stack possible here. So if you have any stacks you're curious about, feel free to drop it in the YouTube chat. We'll try to get on them before we jump off here and do the Hall of Fame and all that stuff. But Colorado, Alex, going against Dinelson Lamet. We talked about him not knowing what to expect from him as a pitcher. It's a good pitcher, though, on his surface, and the bullpen behind him also very good. So are you finding any interest in Colorado? Doesn't seem like the top stacks still looks on them that favorably.
Yeah, Colorado is just a bad team this year. They got like 2 batters that are decent when you take away the Coors bump the stats, Story and Blackman. But the rest of the guys are probably league average or worse. So the matchup versus Lamet is a negative, but the weather kind of neutralizes that to some extent. But they're all priced to play in Coors. They're all like really expensive today. So I just think he can do a little bit better elsewhere.
Terry, any thoughts for you on Colorado, or are you mostly on the same page with what Alex is saying?
Yeah, very much on the same page. I guess there is always an argument to be made to go to any team in Coors when they're getting under 1% ownership across the team, except for like one guy, Trevor Story. So from that perspective, if you want to get a little different and still play Coors Field, that's your spot. But it's just not a good lineup. They're just not good hitters. So it's difficult to get there for me.
I'm also, this is just a random thing, but Chris in the YouTube chat saying, have Mitch Moreland and Mike Moustakas been ever seen in the same room together? I honestly, that wasn't even the part that got me. There's 3 guys named Mitch on this slate, which I just find like there's like baseball has a very high Mitch per capita, I think is the main thing that I learned because I just control F Mitch to see, well, just out of curiosity. And there's a lot of Mitches.
At least they have different last names. They're not the Will Smith double up at pitcher and catcher that screws everyone up. Still got to fix it. I got to change every day. I change the pitcher's name to Bill Smith. So
yeah, I have to take it out of the Fangraphs hitting every single time, I think, because he ruins the other Will Smith. It's not my favorite thing.
Don't even get me started on Min-Soo Kim.
that's the dead eyes of a man who's had to stare way too much at his Excel spreadsheet. How are you feeling about any other stacks, Alex? Is there anybody that you want to mention to the people here before we do the Hall of Fame and give our home run picks?
I think what you were saying earlier about it being kind of flat today is right. And there's just a lot of teams with about average potential today. So that means you can go to a lot of different stacks. I'll probably have a portfolio of, at least half of these 24 teams. Yeah, so I think you can really mix it up today.
Terry, any other stacks you want to bring to people? And we got to ask about the White Sox stack that I mentioned on some shows recently. I'm a believer in Maeda. I think he's slowly starting to regress back to what he's supposed to be positively. 28% K rate guy, just shy of that since 2019. And I think the numbers underlying are starting to bounce back. So that's my take on it. But Terry, do you have any White Sox thoughts or anybody else stack wise you just want to mention before we call it quits?
Yeah, I'm with you on that, actually. We've talked about Maeda a little bit. I've raved about him, what he does with inducing soft contact, keeping the ball on the ground and in the yard. And we're going to see that come back for him throughout the course of this year. So it's more of a spot where I don't get a great projection on Maeda like I normally would today just because of that White Sox lineup going against him. But I don't get great projections for them either. Don't get great home run upside because of what he does on the mound. A team that I am curious about, maybe hearing Alex's thoughts real quick, because they're projecting nicely for me, getting nice home run marks on them, going up against John Means on the other side. I mentioned them earlier. The New York Mets, they rank pretty far down our stack board. They're not getting much ownership, but they are popping for me in the home run model. So, Alex, are you getting any Mets here? Are they going to be in that portfolio of like half these teams?
Yeah, so I think, New York today, it's going to be about 60 at first pitch, low humidity. So the weather is favoring pitchers a little bit, but also the lineup they're rolling out today. Let's see, it just has a lot of guys that haven't been playing very well. Once you get past Pete Alonso, pretty much all minus hitters from what I'm seeing here. So I'm not like super keen on them, but maybe you can talk me into some of these guys towards the bottom of the order. I know VR is a guy that steals a bunch of bases and sometimes sits for power, so that's kind of interesting. Which guys are you looking at?
Yeah, so obviously, for the most part, the obvious numbers are coming off the top of the lineup with the guys like Pete Alonso getting monster home run mark. I'll always get to Frankie Lindor and Conforto. Jeff McNeil, I think, is interesting there. But then you just hit on, I think Johnny VR is still somewhat interesting. He's not been there at all this year. 226, 333, 355 / so far this year. Was bad in 207 plate appearances last year. If you go back to 2019, 714 plate appearances. The guy hit 24 home runs and stole 40 bases. He had a 274, 339, 453 / 179 ISO created run 7% better than average. That's a good guy to use in terms of building in a wraparound. He's got multi-position eligibility on both sites. Super cheap, totally unowned. Use him to get back to Frankie Lindor and Pete Alonso off the top, and then work it down, 1 through 5. If you want to mix in James McCann on DK, that's a good catcher to use there. So I like the Mets. I think they could be a little sneaky. Again, I just wish John Means was getting more love for his no-hitter from the other day by the public so I could throw some leverage at it.
All right, so Terry, give me your home run pick to close us out. No time for the Hall of Fame, but it would tune into the NBA Deeper Dive because Laffy, I'm sure, will get that in as he always does. But Terry, give me your final thoughts on a home run pick.
Pete Alonso from the New York Mets.
Alex, how about you?
Damn, I'm always so unprepared for this. All right. I'll go with this Fenway game. I think it's kind of interesting. Oakland being under-owned, so I'm seeing Matt Olson. I guess he's always a great power hitter, and he's got the platoon split in his favor.
And I'm going to take Kevon Biggio against Bryce Wilson. I like the lefty matchup there. 341 ISO allowed to lefties from Wilson. He's bad against everybody, but I think Biggio can come through in the spot. And that's it. So make sure to follow at DigitalB21, follow at Awesemo DFS, follow at Chris Spags as well, so you can see all the content that we're doing, all the shows. We always make sure to retweet links or tweet it out ourselves. And make sure you're following at Awesemo_com as well. We have tons of great content coming up, including the tip-off on another stream right now, the Deeper Dive, live before lock. And if you are curious about how our pal Eric Lindquist is going to pay off his various bets related to his eyebrows, you are going to find out on those shows. So go jump over there now. We appreciate you guys for watching. Shout out No House Advantage for helping us put on the show. We'll see you guys again very soon. So enjoy your days and good luck.